Welcome back on stage. And it's not only me, it's also Lennart here in that discussion.
Hi.
And we are broadcasting live from the Launchpad at House of Innovation I/O in wonderful Stuttgart. We are delighted with the weather again today. Yesterday, we have learned a lot about the interaction possibilities with technology. And our today's topic will be technology empathy. And the core question around that is how empathy can help us to create better products and services.
Exactly, this is our core question, and I'm also very happy to be here, being part of the conference, and I'm more than delighted to introduce now our three panel guests today. So first of all, big shout out to Michael Ventura, who's sitting in New York City. He is founder and CEO of Sub Rosa. We also have Donatella Caggiano. She is in Milano and she's a global creative hacker. So very curious about also her opinion.
Maybe we get hacked today.
Exactly. And we have Dominik Multhaupt in Berlin. He is Senior Director Digital Strategy from IBM iX. So very, very cool having you on board, being part of this discussion. Coming back to our core question and the technology empathy. So how can empathy help us creating better products and services? So Michael, to you, you said empathy, it's not just being nice, right? So keeping that in mind, what does it mean actually applying empathy, building better products? Perhaps you can define from your perspective what it means.
Sure, yeah, happy to, and thanks for having me. Empathy is a very human trait. It's something that we all have. Sometimes when people talk about empathy, they talk about it like it's a special gift that only some people have. But I often talk about it as a muscle we train. So while some people have more of it than others, it's not because that's just the way they were born. It also might be because they practice it more. And so when we think about how technology starts to incorporate empathy, we have to bear in mind that we're trying to make technology behave in an innately human way. And that's not always very natural for technology. And also technology, which is being created by humans, is going to be flawed in the same way humans are flawed, right? And our own biases and our own ways of seeing the world may influence the way we train our algorithms or the way our technology performs. And so when we think about the use of empathy, particularly as it pertains to how to improve our pieces of technology or the work we're doing in the digital world, empathy starts at the most fundamental place from a desire to understand, a desire to listen. And so if we leap to conclusions, if we presuppose we understand who we're talking to on the other side and make assumptions based on that, we're not giving empathy the space to listen and learn. And so for me, the most important thing that has to play a role in building technology with empathy is enough room, enough latitude for learning and listening to occur. And that's whether you're training an algorithm or looking to user interactions on a website or whatever it might be. That gathering of information is really valuable.
Thank you. Yeah. Then let's switch to Milano with that statement. Donatella, what do you think? How do you use empathy in your work? Can you give us some examples?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. So first of all, before becoming a creativity hacker, I come from corporate executive background. So I worked for a long time in marketing and communication for global consumer brands and et cetera, et cetera. And what that experience taught me was that there is a difference between designing for what people want and designing for what people need. Mm-hmm. And that makes a crucial difference in the culture that you're going to create. And when I talk about creativity, it definitely starts from the same principle of listening first and empathy, because what I do is basically helping companies and brands and organizations go through a difficult change, which is a change from being product-led to being people-led. And what that means is like prioritizing the impact that you're going to make on their lives and the actual cultural footprint that you're going to have in the ecosystem. And we have very we have examples of this every day in all the services that we experience as a consumer, for example. So I think there's a silver lining of whatever happens with the pandemics in the past 6 months, because I think it demonstrated how empathy is very much a design principle that precedes technological acceleration. Technology is just the amplifier, right? So it is very much under our very eyes that we kind of need to work on the mindset first and the technology second. I give you a very fast example. In Italy, when I came back from America, of course, as an Italian in America, I was like, oh my God, these guys are studying empathy? I mean, come on, Italians have had empathies all their lives, right? Right? Exactly. But to make empathy actionable, you actually need strategy to get there in a way, in a business context. So let's just say, at the end of the pandemic in Italy, after lockdown, there was a huge hiatus around cutting your hair because experiencing cutting your hair was becoming a liberation idea of like coming back to normal. And I have experienced this service with this local business in which I actually wanted to give my brother a gift card for cutting his hair. And I couldn't find the gift card anywhere on the website. So I called them and I was like, how do I get there? It was like an 8-hour journey of me having to go back and forth with them, kind of negotiating and having to send them a wire and then having to whatever. So what that means is they didn't take care of the last part of the user experience correctly. And they were also talking to a customer that was no longer the customer. They were talking to them in December, right? You're now talking about somebody that is exhausted, somebody that has experienced loss, somebody that is at home smart working, not very smartly, as we all know. And so that pain was not considered in the design of that experience. And it's something this simple that make you understand how if you practice empathy, you actually design your experience in a way that not only you retain the customer, but you build trust, which is essential strategically to build a more meaningful impact for your brands.
Exactly.
Yeah, great example.
Yeah, pretty great. Actually, also the aspect with the strategy, which leads us to our third guest, Dominic. You as a Senior Director Digital Strategy, what do you think or how do you behave here? Do you have any examples how empathy can help you to create the products? Perhaps you can link that to the statement Donatella just mentioned.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, there's not too much to add to what Donatella and Michael said before. But from the strategy perspective, you might know that especially IBM is using the IBM Enterprise Design Thinking method. So whatever we do or whatever we design, we try to bring the human-centered focus into the game. So in all steps of designing new services, new products, I think what's very important when talking about empathy is to include the final customers into the whole process. So from the early beginning, from the early stage, we already include those people who design the services and products for, but also those who will work with them later on. So I think, yeah, that's all about it. So during those lean service design process, the strategic point is always there included.
We as a company builder usually work with founders and innovators in a very early stage. So with many different disciplines, and empathy for us is so important because it helps us to anticipate their ideas, their new technologies they want to use, their customer needs. And that actually for us is very important to understand because we're creating visions out of that or company structures. So to understand the world around us, the context is a must have for us.
Exactly. And it's all about listening, So starting with listening in the very early stage is the best you can do. So, and it has to be real, authentic listening. Yeah.
Exactly. And there we're coming to the point what Michael was mentioning, giving enough room, right? So to listen, you need, I think, this room to people so that they can be empathic. Perhaps, Michael, to coming back to you, when we have here the discussion with cross-international teams, what do you think? How crucial is empathy, or what you mentioned, applied empathy, also to those diverse cross-international teams? Also, when we're coming back building products, we also have these diverse teams coming from very different disciplines. How hard, how different is that perhaps being empathic than just being in one discipline? What do you have any experience about that?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's a very good question. The challenge with a lot of the cross-discipline, cross-border work is that people have very different ways of operating on teams and very different cultures you're sort of starting to intersect when you build a product cross-border. And so one of the things we often advise our clients with is to make sure that there are early conversations about ways of working and understanding that how we're going to gather information and what we're going to use this information to do or to improve. And so when we think about that internally within the confines of a team, that looks like having conversations about how cultural perspectives on where how work might get done or what we're solving for might be biased based on the borders around us. And so when we think about designing something for a US client, we inherently have a US lens because that's where we sit. But if we're designing something we just finished a big piece of work in Thailand over the past year. And one of the pieces of work that we had to do early on was really immerse ourselves in Thai culture and understand how the Thai business community uses technology in a way that is different, both in terms of just apps and services, but also in terms of user experience and what they expect and what they don't expect and what feels invasive and what feels complementary. And the cultural expectations are often different. The other thing I'll mention too, which I think is an interesting point on this, is when we think about artificial intelligence as a piece of technology in this world, the area we've spent a lot of time in the past few years has really been in natural language processing and natural language generation, because for us that is a foundational component of empathy. When we think about NLP and NLG, what we're doing, NLP is essentially listening, right? It's reading written text and it's interpreting based on what it reads. And NLG is going to then write text in a human form. And so if we're trying to train an AI to engage with people, we have to use the right balance of NLP, so we're actually processing what they're sending us, and NLG, what we're giving back to them, to create a close proximate to human interaction, even if it's human and machine interaction.
Exactly, and when you think about combining that with the AI feasibilities of facial recognition, how you're behaving, how your expression is, how your pupils are moving around, something like that, then we're coming, I guess, to the next level of empathy, aren't we?
Yeah, and with that comes a requirement, in my opinion, for businesses to also build a code of ethics into how they will use that technology and where that technology will and won't be applied. You know, I come back to just taking an American view, right? In our last election in 2016, Cambridge Analytica and the research and technology that they did for the Republican campaign was an example of what I would call nefarious empathy. So empathy unto itself, when we gather that understanding about someone else, that understanding is neutral. It's only until we apply it that we determine how that understanding is going to be used. And so we can use that understanding to improve our customer experience. We can use that understanding to improve our relationship. But we also can use that understanding, as in the case with Cambridge Analytica, to manipulate behavior. And so what happened in that case was by having empathy, although using it in a negative way, by having empathy for the way consumers interacted on Facebook and other social channels and how they consumed information, they were able to choose what information to feed to them in order to inform and shift their behavior in a different direction. And because there was no transparency and because there was no acceptance of that, that's where the ethics code was broken, in my opinion. So as technology becomes more and more prevalent, and as we're learning more and more about people on the other side of the screen, businesses have to make an investment in a code of ethics to make sure they're using that information in a transparent way and in an ethical way.
That's right. Especially when we talk about digital health, for example, we see a lot of coders there where we need actually to ask, do you need this code of conduct there to create that? In the last 2 days, we were talking a lot about this rapid change which occurs our society right now. And we have heard AI quite often as a truly game changer this time. And happy to mention that topic here. Dominic, maybe you can also add some of your ideas or experience to this AI case here.
Yeah, experience. Okay. The thing is, what I always wonder concerning this topic is who and when we will start to really define those codes of conduct. And we are those who are responsible to make sure that no ethic rules are broken now and in the future. But I think it's getting more complex, and you don't always realize what you're really working on and what can be done with things you design or you develop. So this is something very important, because I think as long as those technologies evolve in such a way, there are lots of people out there in the society who maybe reject such solutions or even fear them, or may show some kind of anxiety when they hear of those ideas. And I think people who have fear of anything, and especially technological solutions, they might not. Those people might become dangerous, but we will develop a dangerous solution, because those people who fear things, they can be easily reached by others who might have populism ideas or things like that. So I think having in mind that we have a responsibility when designing new technologies and bringing together new solutions, we have to keep in mind that those rules are not yet defined. So it's from my point of view, it's a situation we cannot really we cannot be sure what it will lead us to. Concerning AI, for example, it is like from my experience, we are always asked to show this responsibility when designing AI solutions. Like at IBM, they say always have in mind, always think ethically correct, and always have in mind that the things you develop with your clients or your customers are ethically correct. So this is everything at the moment. This is all we can do. Just mention it as often as possible.
But what do you think? Until when we can expect that the technology can also be some kind of empathic and understands us when we are interacting with it, and adapts to our behaviors or fears or whatever you were mentioning?
There's one area that I'll mention on this that it may not be the most obvious or often considered the most innovative place, but call center technology is actually, and customer service technology is actually doing a lot of work in this space in order to reduce down the amount of human labor required for responding to the most common issues being brought up from customers. So there's a bit of a 70-30 rule from most of the research I've read, that you, with the right AI training and the right expectation management, you can actually solve 70% of the customer service requests through AI and leave the real ones that require human touch, the ones that require someone getting either in chat or on the phone with you and talking through the problem, and leave that for the more human to human interaction, but actually reduce the overall cost of call centers considerably by bringing AI into there. So there's actually really good technology taking place in that space at the moment pertaining to AI and predicting models.
Yeah, exactly. Those things already exist, but I always wonder, when bringing in such solutions, you always say you optimize processes, for example, right? As you said, when you reduce call center interactions around 70 or 80%, the people working there, they have more time to do the real important stuff and things. But I always wonder, what are those more important things? Do all the people who work there still work there when we introduce such solutions? And that's my question about this topic, for example.
Yeah.
I think there's something, sorry, I just wanted to add something to it that has nothing to do with the usual realm we think technology is being applied, but I really admire the work that has been done when it comes to all the startups that are popping up in Silicon Valley, for example, that are dealing with death and funeral services. You know what, when you design a strategy, you often learn from extremes to then
exactly.
And trickle it down back to just more consumer world. And that is, for example, a space in which the majority of the service is still handled by talking to other people. Like the startups are made by humans to humans, because that is a realm that is very effectively managed by relieving the people that are in a moment of stress, that require the most empathy at that moment. Anything from closing the social media account of your dear one to, doing something on the behalf of the family. And I think that's a great example of how empathy can really be used for service, and then automate, let's just say, all the other things that do not require that specific, care and that specific service. So if we apply that to other type of realm, how can we think like a funeral home in the highest moment of stress, and then design back from there? Because that's a good template, I believe, to use in thinking AI versus empathy, when to use and when to use not.
Maybe we can stay with you, Donatella, because you said at the beginning you're creating the journeys from the brands today into the future there. With all these technologies which are occurring, all this maybe not so well feeling in the companies, not knowing how to handle them and how to get there. What would you recommend us? How do you like to create this change, and how could you bring those communities together? So Michael just said, with the view on the business community, we divide that also to the design and tech community, trying to bring them together. What could you recommend us here? How would you design such kind of change and connect to technology?
Right. So I always start from thinking of technology as a language. Right. So if you think about technology as a language, and it's basically etymologically, that's what it means. It's like technology means translating knowledge into action. Right. And so if you think about that as a language, then designing technology becomes an exercise of translation. So if you think about that, you're able to touch a lot of communities and a lot of things, because that translation starts from how you design the language in the room. So I very much agree with what Michael was saying is, for example, when you work with multicultural group facing multicultural challenges, the most important thing is that you set up an agenda for that group that is clear and transparent. So for example, why we gather, what are we looking for? What are we trying to solve? And then ask you back that question at the end of the process, and constantly tweaking and experimenting. I think we come from a world in which it's product driven, in a sense that there's one product for one solution and that has to stay on forever, right? But technology is a great tool to actually modulate our mindset in thinking it's impossible to find one product that's going to stay on forever. It's actually more meaningful to use technology to make us adaptable to change, because change comes from people. The pandemic demonstrated that. The racial issue awareness demonstrated that, and technology catch up. Okay. So it always starts in the room. It always starts with the way you design the process to get there, which has to include empathy. If it's not at the beginning of the process, it's not going to be at the end.
The opinion of the others there, could you maybe add some of your examples to such kind of journeys? Because for us, it's always this Sherlock Holmes moment, because not all the participants usually can directly explain what their pain points are. they can feel it or they know it, but for them it's very difficult to bring it to the point and say, this is something I would like to change, but they are feeling not comfortable, let's say like this. And this is also a good use case then for us to use empathy, understanding, and taking them on the journey to get a better description actually, where we could have some, should create some measures there. Maybe I am asking the other two. Have you some examples in mind? Have you created a new journey for people?
I think one area where we've seen a lot of good work in this area is the intersection of both software and hardware to actually inform how we improve the overall journey for someone. So thinking about the hardware side first, when we think about whether it's an Apple Watch or some other kind of wearable where we're gathering biometric data or we're gathering information about someone's geolocation or whatever it is, and they've of course opted in to share that with the company, what we're actually also gaining is a greater sense of empathy, right? We're gaining a sense of how they spend their time, what their bodies are reacting to, where their, what their heart rates are, how much sleep they're getting, all of this sort of passive information gathering. And if we're using that in the right way, of course, putting it all in the ethics bubble again, of course, but if we're using it the right way, that will inform and improve the way software actually performs in predictive models, being able to say, this time of day is the right time of day to serve this information to this customer. This time of day is when they are, when they're in their relaxed state, and we can deliver them longer form content that they might enjoy more, and not be sort of getting it in the middle of the business day when they don't have the time to read a 1,000-word article that we send them. So these little listening devices that we tend to find ourselves in, whether it's the phone in our pocket or the watch on our wrist or whatever it is, if we're using that information we're gathering in a mindful and thoughtful way, we're ultimately going to be able to make choices as marketers, as product developers, as entrepreneurs that are going to help people make the more logical and elegant choice for how to work with their customers on the other side of a digital experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think just to add, the combination of like emotions and the empathic use of data might be the best way you can act. And because sometimes even if you listen carefully and you work with customers and target groups, you might not always be able to find the right associations between the information you get. And I think especially enriching those information you collected before by data, and by complex data, for example, where you can find out patterns or behavior you might not see on first glance, for example, might be very, very useful. And the combination is the solution in the end, I think. Mm-hmm. And what Donatella said before about culture, I think it's really interesting. I read a few articles about, I don't know if you read them, about soft scaling, and there were some examples from companies in India, I think, where they in a very nice way were able to explain and to show, you might look them up later on the internet, how the combination of including not only your customers into empathic planning, but also your employees, by setting up the right culture to create a situation of co-creation and cooperation. Are very, very good examples of how companies can improve.
Mm-hmm. So for all the participants in the conference, if you have any questions, start sending them over, because we're getting close to the end. Mm-hmm. But maybe a last question to all of us, or to all of you.
Yeah, go ahead.
If you think about empathy in general, what would you say? Can we use that method, tool, this idea to shape a new area? Because this is the topic of our next talk. That's why I'm asking, and maybe getting a bridge here. So what would you say? Give us some maybe statements. How could we use that to create the new?
Especially when we're applying that now to technology, what we have talked now, is that really shaping the new era from your perspective?
So empathy doesn't solve every problem. I think it's important.
Come on.
but
I hope so. Yeah.
There's a but. It is a bridge building tool, and
Yes.
so I think what we have to remember when we use empathy is that in this world we live in, particularly in the past few years, we've seen the cultural divides get even bigger, whether it be through the way we've dealt with the COVID crisis in different countries, or the refugee crisis in different countries, or the cross-border visa permissions in different countries, whatever it might be. Every country has started to, by and large, push the distances a little further, making the gaps a little wider. And the way that we bridge those gaps is through empathy. And so if we're able to make empathy a fundamental part of our leadership style, a fundamental part of the way we build products, and a fundamental part of the way we show up for each other, then I think we get to a place where where those gaps become less daunting, where we're able to actually connect together and understand the person on the other side of the screen or on the other side of the conference room in a way that maybe we didn't a few years ago. And while we may not always agree, we can still be agreeable, and we can still find paths toward compromise and collaboration, because I think that we have sort of lost touch with that in the race to sort of the biggest profit margins and the highest market share.
Other opinions?
Yeah, well,
No,
if I think about the future, well, it's impossible to think about the future, but I think about the present. But I think before the pandemic, in a way, we were already very ready for a change, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we were living in an era in which we kind of were living through, technology helped us live through a world of emotional allergy, in a way. You know, we designed out a lot of the discomfort, the fear, the anxiety, that then all came back into the picture and built emotional resilience through life. Simple as that. So if I think about the future, I think about us as a system designing technology that will actually design discomfort, fear, and anxiety in and not push them out, and be able to learn from the people that are actually facing more of this discomfort. Kind of also close to what Michael was saying is like, if we keep this conversation close and we have technology that help us get there, to build emotional resilience and learn from minority, from artists, from people in danger, people in discomfort, that will trickle down in leadership and any other situation that we need our business to go to, because businesses are ultimately in service of people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I also think that I think the recent years before all this pandemic thing started, we often, or we very much forgot to listen, or we didn't listen as much as we should have. And I think this is the only thing I sometimes think which might be a positive side effect of what just happened out there, is that many people I talk to get back to this way of interacting with others. There's much more listening and socializing between the people. But also I have to confess that sometimes I wonder if it's just my bubble I'm living in, you know, because I do not know if the largest amount of people out there already wants to get back to normal as soon as possible, and I have the question if it's just me in my bubble, or maybe they will get back to the same situation they were in before and again forget.
Let me have a look to the chat if there are any questions. Yeah, there's a comment here. Let's say like this. At the end, we should not forget empathy or listening or losing on
oneself
in that discussion.
Yeah, basically kind of overall summary what we just have mentioned, right? So it's about listening, and we're coming back to that point you mentioned earlier, Michael, in the very beginning, giving this room to listen to people, and I think that's pretty much a pretty good conclusion here. Yep.
Are there any more questions from the audience? Don't see any there yet.
Yeah.
Okay, so then let's say thank you to all three of you. It was a great chance for us to have you here in the chat. We were delighted. Thank you very much for your time and sharing your views on that. And for all the others, please stay here with us because we are coming up next with the idea on how we can shape a new area.
Thank you also from my side to all three.
Yeah. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.